In Alberta, some 15,000 people have been tested, and as of now, more than 119 cases of novel coronavirus infection have been confirmed, an addition of 22 cases since yesterday. Fortunately, we have not suffered loss of life to this disease. And while we hope for the best, the velocity and nature of this pandemic means that Albertans will not be immune. We will experience fatalities. That is why we are taking increasingly stringent measures to slow the spread of this virus. It is why we declared a public health emergency yesterday to ensure that our healthcare system has the tools to cope with the peak of the viral curve, which we expect about 4 weeks from now. It is why this legislature authorized an additional appropriation of $500 million in the budget last night to ensure funding for Alberta Health Services as our world-class medical professionals fight this disease. And let there be no doubt, we will spare no expense in fighting COVID-19. And we will win that fight. We will do everything within our power to limit the spread of this disease and to maximize the capacity of our health system to cope with the top of the curve of infections. And I can assure Albertans that our medical professionals believe that with the measures taken to date and efforts to maximize the capacity of our health system, that we will be able to care for those who are infected and to get through this with as little, in terms of fatalities, as possible, Mr. Speaker. Other jurisdictions around the world have seen their health systems overwhelmed, and we are doing everything in Alberta to prevent that from occurring here. Mr. Speaker, that is why we have taken increasingly stringent social distancing measures, such as the decision to suspend classes, to close recreation facilities and bars, casinos, gyms, children's play areas, to limit service at restaurants, and to ban organized events of over 50 people. This includes weddings, funerals, and religious gatherings. It is also why we have invoked a public health emergency to ensure that we have the powers that we need to ensure the protection of Albertans. Mr. Speaker, none of these are easy decisions to make. Behind a decision to close every business lies lost jobs and lost dreams. I understand, I am sure we all understand, the profound anxiety of everyone who has been affected. They're wondering how they'll pay the bills. Small business owners wonder whether they'll ever be able to reopen. And at the same time, tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Albertans have done the right thing and stayed at home in self-isolation because they feel unwell or they've recently traveled abroad. From elementary school kids whose routines have just been upended, to the self-employed who have no safety net, to entrepreneurs who fear losing their life savings, to seniors who feel particularly vulnerable or isolated. There is fear and anxiety. Mr. Speaker, we need all of those Albertans who feel such fear and anxiety to know that they are not alone. In facing this unprecedented challenge, we have each other. We have strong institutions. We have a culture of caring and of resilience. We have a world-class healthcare system, one of the best funded on earth. And together, we will get through this. Mr. Speaker, for those who may be feeling depressed, I encourage them to reach out to friends or family, to social service organizations. Mental health support is available, and one way of accessing it is by calling the Alberta Health Services Mental Health Support Line at 1-877-303-2642. Mr. Speaker, at the height of the Blitz, when the Luftwaffe was bombing the cities of England in 1940, when it looked like all was going to be lost in the great struggle for civilization, the British government prepared signs that it had distributed and displayed on every street corner and lamppost that said, "Keep calm and carry on." And so while people are right to feel great anxiety, we encourage Albertans to have confidence in the strength of our institutions and in one another, to keep calm and to carry on. Mr. Speaker, having said that, this public health crisis has been matched by economic challenges of, I believe, an increasingly unprecedented nature. Mr. Speaker, we know that the coronavirus has caused a collapse in global demand and the onset of a worldwide recession. It is hard for us right now to grasp the potential depth of that recession. I do not offer these views to discourage people. I think it is our collective responsibility as leaders to offer a sense of solidarity, confidence, and hope, but it must be predicated on realism. Today, major financial institutions are projecting that the American economy is likely to experience a contraction of as much as 14% in the second quarter of this year, and 30% in Europe. Canada will not be immune. Indeed, Alberta is likely to be at least as badly affected because of, obviously, the important presence of the energy industry in our economy, which is now being hit by an unprecedented decline in energy prices after 5 years of economic fragility. As I speak, at the end of trading today, the price of the benchmark energy price for Alberta, WTI, was trading at $21, and Western Canadian Select Oil was trading at $9. I just received a projection from a major financial institution that the average price for Brent oil in the second quarter of this year may be as low as $5. We have never experienced anything like this in the history of our energy industry. When layered on top of a massive global contraction in demand, and layered on top of 5 years of economic and social fragility, Mr. Speaker, we are facing a period of profound adversity. And that is why this government will join other governments across Canada in doing everything within our power to protect people. First of all, to protect the health of people. Secondly, to protect the financial security of people. And thirdly, to protect our broader economy. But, Mr. Speaker, we must begin to prepare ourselves for a time of adversity unlike any we have seen since the 1930s in this province. Happily, we enter this time of adversity as a much wealthier society. We enter this time of adversity with the youngest and best educated population in Canada. We enter this time of adversity with a province that leads the world in so many ways. And we enter this time of adversity with a determination to get through it together and to emerge stronger than ever. Today, the Government of Canada announced a number of measures which we appreciated. I believe totaling some $27 billion fiscal action, much of it concentrated on income support through a significant expansion of the employment insurance system. This morning I spoke to Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, and on behalf of Albertans, thanked the Government of Canada for those measures with which we have worked with them. Albertans should understand, Mr. Speaker, that we have been significant net contributors to the employment insurance system for decades, and that it is only right that we should be able to see some of our decades-long net contributions come back to help us at this time of need. However, the Government of Alberta must act in its own right. And so today I will enumerate some of the initial measures, extraordinary financial and economic measures that we will take to try to protect people from the effects of this disturbing and pending downturn. First of all, as I mentioned last night, Mr. Speaker, this Assembly authorized a $57 billion budget for the upcoming fiscal year that gives us certainty that we will be able to deliver the critical public services that Albertans will need now more than ever. In addition to a $500 million supplementary appropriation for the healthcare system, which we anticipate will be the beginning and not the end of additional resources to combat COVID-19. Secondly, yesterday we announced $60 million for municipalities, charitable and nonprofit organizations providing social services to support seniors and other vulnerable people who are affected by COVID-19. And I can assure the House that my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services in particular, is working with our homeless shelters to ensure that they have the resources to protect vulnerable people from the potential spread of the disease. The further actions that we announced today take assistance one step further for Albertans. Effective immediately, we will take a number of measures to help Albertans struggling financially. We will provide as a bridging mechanism $50 million to Albertans who are currently self-isolating or will be self-isolating in the next 2 weeks because they meet the Chief Medical Officer's published criteria before the federal payments for emergency support begin to flow later in April. This will be distributed in one payment, and Albertans will be able to apply online at alberta.ca next week. We expect that funds will be deposited in bank accounts by the end of next week. The point here is to provide for the availability of cash as quickly as possible so that individuals are not forced to choose between doing the right thing for public health and staying at home in self-isolation if they feel ill or have recently come back from abroad, and working. And so those Albertans need to understand that a payment of $572 will be available to them through this emergency financial support. The government will defer utility charges for residential, farm, and small commercial customers for the next 90 days and will ensure no Albertans will be cut off from these services. So I repeat, Albertans will have full protection from having to pay utility bills over the next 3 months. This will cover electricity and natural gas, regardless of the service provider, and I have spoken to mayors to encourage them to match these measures with respect to water charges. Like the federal government, Alberta will also implement a 6-month interest-free moratorium on student loan payments for all individuals who are in the process of repaying these loans. Similar to actions by Canada's 6 largest banks, we have worked with ATB Financial to ensure a relief program for customers affected by COVID-19. Personal banking customers can apply for a deferral on their ATB loans, their lines of credit, and their mortgages for up to 6 months. Small business customers, in addition to payment deferrals on loans and lines of credit, will be provided access to additional working capital. For other businesses and agricultural customers, ATB will work with customers on a one-to-one basis, and further solutions are being considered at this time. Alberta Credit Union members will also have access to a variety of programs and solutions tailored to their specific situations. Both individuals and businesses are encouraged proactively to contact their credit union directly to work out a plan for their personal situation. And I want to thank, Mr. Speaker, the major national Schedule A chartered banks for having taken similar steps announced just hours ago to provide mortgage and personal loan relief, as well as relief to small businesses in terms of their repayment schedules to reflect these extraordinary circumstances. And so, Mr. Speaker, on top of the immediate needs in our health system, this pandemic has also changed our day-to-day lives and our spending habits. We are also working diligently to put the right plans in place to ensure people will have access to jobs to come back to when this situation passes. Mr. Speaker, many businesses are concerned whether they will be able to reopen their doors after this public health crisis. So effective today, we are suspending the collection of corporate income taxes and installment payments until August the 31st, 2020, to match a measure announced by the Government of Canada today. This will give Alberta businesses access to about $1.5 billion in funds to help them cope with this difficult situation. This is in addition to the decision of the Government of Canada today, made in cooperation with the Government of Alberta, to also defer the filing deadline for personal income taxes to help individuals seeking to cope to pay their bills now. These measures will maximize the cash available to Alberta families and employers so that they can pay their employees, address other debts, and maintain operations. I'm grateful to all employers who are placing the safety of their people above profit. I encourage them where they can to provide paid leave to those who have had to take time for self-isolation. I also encourage them, wherever possible, to provide some support to individuals they've had to lay off in the interim period. The more employers who are able to maintain operations and continue to pay their staff, the greater the chance we have of keeping Albertans working and negating some of the damage of COVID-19 on our economy. In these exceptional circumstances, making sure businesses have the ability to stay in business is another way we are working to provide certainty to Albertans that we as a province can recover from this crisis. Mr. Speaker, these measures are just the beginning. Our action plan will continue to roll out as the situation continues to change. And it is changing hour by hour, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the House that the government will be announcing additional measures tomorrow, additional measures on Friday, and additional measures next week. I want to thank our public servants, some of whom have literally been working around the clock to help us design these programs and others that we will be announcing in the days to come. But, Mr. Speaker, let me close in saying this. The challenges before us are enormous. They will require great resolve, yes, fast action, but also patience. The period of economic adversity through which we will go is likely to last, at the very least, several months. At this point, Mr. Speaker, a government faced by some of these developments would likely launch an immediate counter-cyclical stimulus package. This government is preparing a very robust package to stimulate the Alberta economy. But to be blunt, the challenge that we face as Albertans' elected representatives is that much of our economy is moving into hibernation right now. And so there are very limited policy levers to stimulate an immediate increase in demand when in fact there's enormous momentum in the opposite direction. And so Alberta's government will, in the immediate term, focus on the immediate imperative of doing everything we can to keep cash in people's bank accounts, to maintain the ability of households to pay their bills, to defer their bills wherever possible, and the ability of businesses to maintain at least basic operations. We are working closely with the Business Development Bank of Canada and Export Development Canada to maximize the use of the recently enhanced credit facilities, which include $10 billion of expanded federal backstop for distressed companies. This morning, I and the Honourable Minister of Energy spoke with the board of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and in the last 2 days, I and the Ministers of Finance and Economic Development, Trade and Tourism have spoken with the leaders of most of the major industry and employer groups across the province to seek their input on what measures we can take to ensure a path forward in the challenging months ahead. And we are prepared to do what it takes to offer a lifeline of hope for families and businesses who are and will be feeling extreme financial distress in the weeks and months to come. For example, we are reviewing every charge and fee assessed by the Government of Alberta to see if that would constitute an impairment to the operation of businesses, employers in the months to come. We welcome suggestions from all corners, including the official opposition, in other areas through which we could provide concrete relief. Mr. Speaker, tonight I will be joining our newly formed Economic Recovery Council, chaired by Dr. Jack Mintz, with representatives of a broad range of sectors of the Alberta economy, including the union movement and the social sector, to help us to begin to focus on the mid to long-term recovery. Because, Mr. Speaker, by necessity, the government is focused on managing multiple crises on an hour-by-hour and day-to-day basis. We need some of our brightest minds as Albertans who are removed from daily crisis management to think seriously and imaginatively about how best that we can recover after we get through the worst of the challenging months ahead. And so we will act with the greatest possible speed, bluntly, to get money in people's pockets, to relieve them from the enormous stress of bills, of mortgage and utility payments, of taxes and other charges. We are developing what will likely be the most robust counter-cyclical stimulus package in the fiscal history of this province. We will work closely with other governments, both municipal and federal. We will depend increasingly on the great compassionate power of civil society, of our charitable, not-for-profit and faith-based organizations that will do so much, that already are doing so much, to care for those who are in need right now. Mr. Speaker, let me close, as I've often said, by reminding Albertans that the history of this province is often one of struggling and emerging, of overcoming adversity. Now more than ever, we need to relearn those memories, to redevelop a sense of social solidarity across regional, demographic, political and other lines. It is a time for us, to the greatest extent possible, to come together for one another. And people need to know that the Government of Alberta will stand behind them at this difficult time.
What's that? Yeah. I think it's going to be at least 20.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Because I put a preset on all
So the Premier is coming soon, and I'm sure he'll want you before we go out.
and then I export JPEG, it's not a JPEG.
It's my beat. Now that the industry is entirely shut down. Yeah. Sounds enough. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're running around it.
Is this the Indian show?
That's good.
Yeah, like right behind, yeah.
And you're like upstairs, geared up, you show son to do it. No, I have a lot of questions. What was yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, you got any questions? Yeah. I'm trying to tell her that like before I go do a hit, we need some answers. Yeah. You know, and they don't really understand that. They've fallen those pressures a couple of times. It just sucks because of my misinformation. Do they have you? They know they're going to be taking this small. Yeah, because I just had to call. I didn't so I called it just to make sure they know what's going on.
Well, I thought it was funny when I got there. And I had a couple of
I won't be showing it.
So it came out right as soon as the answer came. I think that's
Just take a
yeah.
He's kind of government Kansas and good health.
And for like at work, there's a
High. You have somebody who's tall. Just cover health. Like, I hate talking to you. Come on, me.
yeah, just the old one. I was there yesterday. So I always shoot. Well, we were sitting there.
Yeah.
And I used to format that card.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So now I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay, it's not one minute.
and I've used it.
He's running. Like at one point you got up. That's why I was in panic mode. I can't see the verses. I gotta tell them. I gotta tell them. Because I'm expecting a hit right in front of me. No, we knew that. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm.
Whole camera locked up.
Yeah.
I lost it. And that just doesn't actually write to both parties. That was yeah, I don't mind it from over there, but I often will beat my exposure because I just take it off. Yeah. You know, I meter the background and pull on the really blown out. Oh no, because it's do go too close or fast. I should want to say this.
What's that?
Yeah. I'm recording. So you won't be able to look at it. Close to anything. He's gonna have it.
Oh, well,
Because I bet you that ten gets already. Yeah, they're trouble with that. Yeah, they were busy.
well, I need the details.
Steve had a.
There's so many questions all over against this. I can't go on there.
Because the screws that this thing goes into.
I need to stay in the news and then I can go on
So
my.
you need to have this on gold. Bought three screws. The guy's like, can't actually
Nope,
put it
I'm
on
in
the
the
car.
room.
It's gonna be a minimum of $5.
Kenny's not agreeing.
Dave's like,
And I mean, I'd love to take it, but if you want to just take it right now, I said I don't mind that third paragraph.
tell us, you know. So, maybe help you out.
And yeah, I've been communicating with Jason.
Because I think that's
So,
probably.
I have not been, I might not be in the meeting, but I need to listen to this before going into the mortgage information.
Because they rattle out. Like, this thing was really annoying. But, yeah, like
exactly.
lost this thing here.
Yeah, but I'll speak with her. She's here.
And then my problem was, you can't buy one, so you gotta buy all three. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I bought.
Yeah, I mean,
scale
we're
and
waiting for
just did
details,
all.
that's part of it.
Yeah, I was like, I can't figure out just one. They felt like they replaced the kind, you know, the street on it, so like, what's the odds that the old one is slightly different than the new ones that I'm constantly gonna be like, that I'm gonna get, they're not too great. Like now, yeah, if it did,
Just wait for Ministers Savage and Tays, and I believe DM Winnick is joining us, who's responsible for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. I just made a statement in the legislature about some extraordinary economic and financial measures that the government of Alberta is doing to ensure financial security for Albertans during this time of great anxiety. As I said, I am concerned that we are moving into one of the most challenging times in Alberta's economic history. We have seen a further collapse of energy prices today, and some projections that energy prices will go to unprecedented levels. There are projections about a major contraction of the global economy in the months to come. And there is no doubt that this will hit Alberta with greater severity than many other parts of the developed world. That is why the Government of Alberta is acting boldly with a series of measures to keep cash in the bank accounts of Alberta families and to reduce the financial stress on Alberta employers at this very challenging time. Our first priority remains the health of Albertans. The second priority is their financial security. And our third priority is the overall future of our economy. Tonight, I will be joining the newly structured Alberta Economic Recovery Council, made up of some of our leading business leaders and thinkers to begin developing strategies for emerging from the significant downturn that we are facing. But today, I announced a series of concrete and practical measures that include the launching of an emergency payment program of $573 for Albertans who are facing self-isolation and who are not receiving employment insurance benefits. That will be available online next week at alberta.ca. That is in addition to amendments that we've recently made to the Employment Standards Code that protects workers for 14 days if they have to leave their employment in order to go into self-isolation. We have worked with Alberta Treasury branches to ensure that a deferral of ATB loans, lines of credit and mortgages is available for up to 6 months for people who apply who have been affected by COVID-19. We are working with the provincially regulated credit unions to offer the same relief. We thank the major chartered Schedule A banks for having announced a similar package of financial relief to Canadians, including those here in Alberta, both households and employers. We are matching the Government of Canada's deferral of corporate income tax until August 31st of 2020. That will leave $1.5 billion in cash available to Alberta employers as they cope with this challenging time. We are providing a deferral of 6 months for interest-free moratorium on Alberta student loan payments for all individuals who are in the process of repaying these loans. And we are, most importantly, have worked through the Alberta Utilities Commission with our electricity and gas providers to ensure a deferment of bill payments for the next 90 days to ensure that no one will be cut off from these services during this time of crisis. This will cover, as I say, electricity and natural gas, regardless of the service provider. And we've approached the municipal governments to ask if they could match this flexibility for water consumers. This list of actions is very meaningful, but it is by no means comprehensive. We will be announcing additional actions tomorrow and in the days to come. The bottom line for Albertans who are feeling anxious right now is they need to know that there is relief. There is immediate relief on their utility bills, immediate relief available on their mortgage payments. There is, for former students, immediate relief for their student loans. For businesses, there will be greater flexibility on their loans and on access to credit. And for individuals who are in self-isolation, who do not have any other form of financial safety net, there will be an emergency payment available to them from the Government of Alberta next week. So these are initial measures. We, as I've said, will, first of all, spare no expense in the medical fight against the pandemic. And secondly, we will do everything we can as a government to help Albertans get through the challenging days ahead. Happy to take your questions.
The $50 million, can you just walk us through how that's going to sort of work out in terms of where's the money coming from? How did you land on 573?
That's the average EI payment. So it's matching what would be a normal EI, maximum EI payment. And the program is elements of the program are similar to one adopted by Quebec earlier this week. So basically, the government, we were waiting to see what the federal government would do today. We really do thank them for the significant package of financial support through employment insurance, one element of which includes what they call their, it's an emergency credit, emergency care benefit. But that won't be, people will not be able to apply for that if they're in isolation and don't have access to other benefits. They won't be able to apply till April the 1st, and it's quite possible the federal benefits won't flow until later in April. So we're filling that gap to provide immediate cash. We don't want anybody, let's say you're self-employed, you're an Uber driver, and you maybe feel, you don't feel well, but on the other hand, you figure you've got to go out and make $100 today to pay the rent. We don't want you to worry about that. This basically $600 payment should give those people a bit of financial security.
You have to go back to the House to get this 50
No,
million?
actually, Minister Tays, do we? I'm sorry, I'll defer to Minister Tays.
No, we do have a contingency amount in our current budget, so we won't have to go back to the House. There is provision for it.
Est-ce que c'est possible de refaire l'annonce en français rapidement?
I'll take the French questions at the end.
We'll go to the phone. Operator, can you put through the first caller, please?
Thank you. Yes, the first question is from Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Premier. A lot of us, or at least me, have been receiving a lot of messages from businesses and from individuals who talk about, let's really hunker down for a couple of weeks. A big company here in Calgary said, we're going to close down until March 30th, and then we'll reevaluate things. What do you feel about your message was much stronger than that, the message you spoke of in the legislature. What do you say to those people or those businesses who think that this is a kind of a short-term thing, that if we all do, if we take the closures and we take the social distancing and we stay at home, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we can all go back to something close to normal. What do you say to those people or those businesses?
I say, Rick, it's my duty as Premier to offer people a sense of hope, but it's also my obligation to be realistic and honest. I believe there are reasons for hope, strong reasons for hope, that we'll come out of this stronger than ever. But this is going to take some time. And I think Albertans need to start to wrap their heads around that. Our scientists project that the viral infection in Alberta will peak about 4 or 5 weeks from now. That means it will hopefully start to decline in its intensity after that, but still pose a very real threat to public health well into May and then into June. And so many of the social distancing measures that we have had to implement are likely to be in place at least through the end of May. Now, I can't say that with absolute certainty. Let's hope we get some very lucky breaks. Let's hope that the aggressive social distancing measures that we have implemented to date prove to be extraordinarily effective. Let's hope we reach the peak earlier and it affects fewer people than we are projecting. But to be realistic, based on the velocity of this disease around the world, we can expect this to pose a very real threat to public safety for at least the next 2 or 3 months. And then beyond that, Rick, unless and until a vaccine is developed, it will continue to pose a global threat. And most projections I see are for a vaccine potentially to be available to people in 2021. So COVID itself will have a significant effect for at least the next 3 months. Now, most economists are projecting a sharp rebound in the global economy starting in June, because they see the kind of the curve bottoming out on the pandemic, and then they see pent-up demand surging. There are some positive signs the Chinese economy already appears to be showing some growth in demand. However, Rick, then we have to layer over top of that the the collapse in energy prices. And I have to be honest with people. I hope that the Saudis and the Russians come to their senses and stop this war of attrition. But most projections are that they are locked into a price war that could go into 2021. And we have not yet seen oil prices bottom out.
Do you have a follow-up, Rick?
So I want to say, sorry, Christine, just to close that off, I'm sorry for the long response, but I'm just trying to I'm trying to walk you through my own thinking on this, Rick, and I think Albertans need to know what their government thinks about this. We're in tough, probably for the balance of 2020. And we'll get through it, but it's not going to be in a couple of weeks.
Rick, follow-up?
Yes, just a quick one. In Ottawa earlier today, a reporter asked Finance Minister Morneau about whether, because of COVID and because of wanting to get more money into people's pockets, which all governments are talking about these days, that would the federal government pass on hiking their carbon tax on April 1st, which is just a few days away. And the finance minister did not really answer that question. What is your thought about the federal carbon tax going up on April 1st while all of this other stuff is going on and while all governments are trying to have people keep as much of their own money in their pockets at this time in this crisis?
Well, that would make absolutely no sense. The message I sent to Ottawa when I was there a week ago today, meeting with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, was first, do no harm. At this time of extreme economic fragility, please stop doing harm. And that means, please pull back and throw us a lifeline here on additional costs, including the increased carbon tax, including methane regulations, including clean fuel standards, including other federal regulations that are scheduled to come in over the course of the next year. We have an industry, to be blunt, that is basically on life support. The share value of most of our energy companies, or many of them, I should say, has dropped by 90% in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And we are going to do everything we can, we hope with federal assistance, to keep our brilliant world-class energy producers alive so that when the dust settles, they will be there to be a reliable source of energy for the future. But we are working with the federal government. We are working to maximize access to the $10 billion of credit backstop through BDC and EDC. We're working with them potentially on a project to accelerate well reclamation and completion, to put good blue-collar oil field people back to work and reduce environmental liabilities. We believe we're making progress on the methane regulations. But I would repeat to you what I said to Ottawa a week ago today: please stop doing harm. If you want to come back and talk to us about those policies when we're past this in a couple of years, we'll understand. But right now, please stop doing harm.
Operator, can you put through the next call, please?
Thank you. The next question is from Kevin Nimick of CTV. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. I'm wondering if the province has enough of the vital medical equipment, like ventilators, that it could need to fight COVID-19 if more people suffer from it.
I believe we do. I've been briefed by Dr. Hinshaw and Alberta Health Services that, based on their forecasting, we have adequate equipment, adequate surgical suites, ventilators, personal protection equipment, and other critical supplies to deal with the projected peak in infections. Now, their primary concern is around access to appropriately trained medical personnel to actually operate that equipment, which is why, one of the reasons why we declared a public health emergency yesterday, to ensure that AHS managers have the tools to ensure that people are available when they need it. It's also why we've begun postponing elective surgeries, for example, to start freeing up capacity in the health system. But in terms of ventilators, I think we have highest number of ventilators per capita in the country, or we're the second highest perhaps. And quite wisely, AHS ordered an additional 50 ventilators when they got the first news of the coronavirus outbreak in China back in January. So those ventilators are on their way as a kind of a supplementary equipment. I did participate in a call with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland today about joint efforts by provincial and federal governments to acquire even more equipment, because, you know, the worst case scenario is this thing would come back in the fall and we would need even more equipment then. But we believe we're set for what is coming at us this spring.
Do you have a follow-up, Kevin?
I was just wondering if you could elaborate on some of those tools being used by AHS, like trying to hire back some retired physicians. How is that process going? How are we unfolding so far?
You'd have to ask Dr. Hinshaw. I think they're in early stages on that. I can say, you know, one of the things, it allows us to overcome, you know, collective bargaining agreements. For example, if our managers need to, they can cancel people's vacation time. They can be more creative in how they schedule time. But you know what? I don't think they're going to have to use those tools, because we've got great professionals who I'm sure will step to the plate, and they are stepping to the plate. I see Ontario and Quebec put out a request for retired physicians to offer hours in this to deal with the pandemic, and they've been overwhelmed with positive response. I have no doubt that will happen in Alberta.
One more from the phone, and then we'll go back to the floor, Dean. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Chris Varco of the Calgary Herald. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. I'm wondering if you can give me your assessment of the federal assistance package that was announced today. Is it enough? And maybe more specifically, what does Alberta need to see in terms of assistance to the energy and the airline sector?
Well, it's a very good first measure. But as I said to the Deputy Prime Minister today, I suspect that the Canadian economy will need measures that are an order of magnitude larger than this. I noted that yesterday the British government announced an additional £330 billion of additional backstop and income support and other measures. The French government announced 300 billion euros. So we're talking, in the case of those two economies, of in the range of 10 to 50% of GDP. You know, this situation is moving so fast that a week ago, when I was meeting with Chrystia Freeland, I was talking about a counter-cyclical stimulus in the range of 2% of GDP. And I think we all agree that it's going to have to be an order of magnitude larger. We'll do our part here in Alberta, and I'm confident the federal government will as well. And I believe that I know that they are working specifically on packages for the aviation and the energy sectors, recognizing their unique vulnerability right now.
Do you have a follow-up, Chris? No? Okay. Dean?
There was no childcare benefit. Is there a rationale for that? Maybe match.
So, Dean, we just found out the federal package this morning at I guess about 9 o'clock, and Minister Taze and his team are pouring through this to see where there might be gaps. There was a significant enhancement of the Canada Child Benefit here. Of $2 billion, as well as the GST credit, which goes to a lot of low-income families with kids. So we're going to go through that and see if more needs to be done. So, you know, today was an initial package. We're going to see if there are gaps that we need to supplement in the days ahead.
Would you stop renters perhaps from being kicked out if they can't make their rent? Is that something you could pass legislation on that?
We're looking into that. Look, first of all, we would just call on landlords voluntarily to show this a kind of flexibility that banks have on mortgage payments. I think that's the best first step, rather than government bigfooting in. Look, Dean, when it comes to landlords, you're going to have everybody from a retired senior who maybe rents out a room or has a small boarding house, all the way to large corporations. So the capacity to forgive rent will probably vary a great deal, but we will look at that.
Dan, sorry?
Yeah, this utility deferral program, how does that work? Is that something Albertans have to apply for? And with the 90 days, when that's up, you know, provided there's no extension on that, do Albertans have to pay that back in a lump sum, or is that distributed, you know, in the months following?
The utility companies will communicate directly with their customers. They are provincially regulated. We went to them through the Alberta Utilities Commission to ask that they provide this payment flexibility. The bottom line is this. We have asked and they have agreed that they will not cut off service if people do not pay their utility bills over the next 90 days. So there's no need for an application. And I believe the utility companies will be communicating directly with their customers on that. And then we'll review where we're at after 90 days. I'll leave it to the municipalities to comment on whether they're able to match some of these measures on the water side.
Just on the program, the 573, like, how do you keep track of exactly who's eligible?
Yeah.
And the 50 million, that's 87,400 and some individual payments of 573.
You know what, quite frankly, that it's an estimate we're making. It's a bit of a shot in the dark. We do not actually know how many people are in isolation. This will be a temporary program for those who must self-isolate because they meet the government of Alberta's published criteria for self-isolation, including persons who are the sole caregiver for a dependent who must self-isolate because they meet the public health criteria and who will not have another source of pay or compensation while they are being self-isolated. It will be distributed in one payment installment and will bridge the gap until the federal emergency payments begin in April. So basically, this is for folks who, you know, some people in self-isolation might be receiving payment from their employers. There might be people in self-isolation who are already receiving welfare benefits or AISH from Alberta, or maybe they're already receiving EI. We don't think they need this emergency support. This is for the folks who fall between the cracks. You know, imagine that Uber driver, that hairdresser, that small business person who doesn't have any safety net and they don't have any EI, but they had to stay home. That's what this is for. We designed it based on a Quebec program, and 50 million is, to be honest with you, it's a bit of a shot in the dark.
Janet?
I just wondered if there was any provincial top-up potentially coming for the $900 payment that will come from the federal government.
There's a lot of the emergency. Well, this is not. We're not considering a top-up. This is a bridge because they won't be able to make those payments until at least mid-April. And for us, that this is not about. This is actually not an economic measure. This is a public health measure. And we will consider other economic measures as they are required to help people with income security. I'll be blunt with you. We fully expect that the course of this year, we're going to see a significant increase in applications for income assistance, for welfare payments. So we'll be there to support, to provide a basic social safety net for income security. This is immediate cash for people who may be choosing between self-isolation and working. We want them to choose the self-isolation if they need to.
Thanks.
En français?
Juste peut-être nous expliquer un peu l'annonce, puis c'est quoi votre réaction par rapport à
Vous êtes
l'aide?
bilingue? Sorry.
L'aide fédérale, en quoi ça va venir jouer aussi?
La question, c'est...
La question, c'est juste nous répéter l'annonce en français.
Oui, tout d'abord, OK. Évidemment, les Albertans font face à une situation économique grave. C'est la raison pour laquelle le gouvernement de l'Alberta agit aujourd'hui pour donner un coup de main financier aux familles et aux employeurs. Ça comprend un paiement d'urgence de $563 pour les gens qui sont en isolation, en quarantaine, effectivement, pour les raisons de santé publique. Également, c'est une direction que les gens ne doivent pas payer le frais de leur électricité et leur gaz naturel pour les prochains 3 mois. Il y aura une cessation, effectivement, des obligations de paiement. Ils ne perdront pas leur électricité ou leur gaz naturel s'ils ne peuvent pas payer pour les prochains 90 jours. Également, il y a un allègement, effectivement, de paiement sur les prêts pour les étudiants et les mesures pour flexibilité de Alberta Treasury Branches pour les hypothèques et pour les prêts personnels et pour les prêts des petites entreprises. Voici sont quelques mesures. Il y aura davantage dans les jours à venir.
Pour le 573, ça va être une mesure une fois, c'est quelque chose qui va revenir. Comment ça fonctionne exactement?
La semaine prochaine, les Albertans pourront faire une demande en ligne à alberta.ca pour ce paiement d'urgence s'il a fallu qu'ils restent chez eux pour les raisons de santé publique, s'ils ne reçoivent pas les autres paiements, les autres revenus. Tous les critères seront très clairs sur le site web alberta.ca. I think we better wrap up there. Thanks very much, folks. Paul, how's my French?
It wouldn't be a dad joke if it was fresh every time.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see we're all practicing social distance. Is everyone in this room? We're trying to live our practices. I believe so. The sign interpreter could just take one step to the side, please. Perfect. Everyone? Excellent. Welcome to today's COVID-19 update. With us, as always, is Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Chief Medical Officer of Health for Alberta. Also available is Dr. Mark Jaffe with Alberta Health Services. Dr. Hinshaw will give a brief update, and then we'll open the floor to questions, either to Dr. Hinshaw or Dr. Jaffe. I'll now turn over to Dr. Hinshaw.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Since yesterday, we have confirmed 22 new cases of COVID-19. This means that 119 cases have now been identified in our province. We suspect that 6 of these cases are community transmission. Our website does say 7, however, additional investigation has uncovered links for the 1 case, so again, it's now 6 cases of community transmission. Of the 119 cases, 6 individuals are receiving treatment in hospital, with 3 now in intensive care units. 1 previously diagnosed case was admitted to the ICU yesterday. All others are recovering in isolation at home with support from public health officials. As committed, aggregate data showing cases by age range and zone, as well as by local geographic areas, is now available online at alberta.ca/COVID-19. As of this morning, the online self-assessment tool that Alberta Health Services has provided has been accessed more than 1.3 million times. And to date, we have performed close to 15,000 tests. Per capita, we are testing more than any jurisdiction in North America. And just to put that in perspective, that means we have done 1 test for approximately every 290 Albertans. Our lab is doing amazing things, as are our healthcare providers who are doing contact tracing, those who are operating HealthLink phone lines, and those who are running the assessment centers. With respect to community transmission, yesterday I mentioned that we did have some concerns that I was going to speak more about today. Current information indicates that 2 of these cases are in Calgary and 3 in Edmonton who do not have obvious sources of their illness. In addition, 1 case in North Zone seems to have acquired infection while in Edmonton. This is concerning, and we are working to make sure that our testing and our testing availability is adjusted to make sure that we are understanding where cases of transmission are happening. As I mentioned before, we have been doing community tests for just over 10 days now, and we will continue to optimize the balance between testing people who've traveled and testing those who are sick but have not. One particular exposure I want to highlight today is that multiple cases of COVID-19 have been reported from attendees at the Pacific Dental Conference held in Vancouver from March 5th to 7th. As has been reported, we know that cases have been identified from that conference in other provinces across the country, and we have had over 7 cases to date, and more continue to be identified. Therefore, I am asking that all individuals who attended the Pacific Dental Conference self-isolate immediately, even if feeling well, and stay isolated until 14 days have passed from the conclusion of that conference. That would be March 22nd. Individuals who attended the conference and currently have symptoms should continue to stay home and complete the self-assessment tool online at ahs.ca/COVID to arrange for testing and further instructions. Do not go to the hospital or your family doctor for assessment. As a result of these confirmed cases, the Alberta Dental Association and College announced yesterday a mandatory suspension of all non-emergency dental treatment and services. Emergency dental treatment will continue. Yesterday, we also announced that all non-urgent scheduled and elective surgeries in Alberta are being postponed. Alberta Health Services is continuing to contact Albertans scheduled for procedures and will reschedule as soon as possible. Urgent and emergency surgery, as well as oncology and scheduled cesarean procedures, will continue. The decision to postpone elective surgeries and procedures was made by AHS staff to ensure that AHS has the equipment, the staff, and the beds available for the expected increased demand on our healthcare system caused by COVID-19. This is not just about increasing bed capacity. We need adequate numbers of frontline healthcare workers, as well as personal protective equipment, to handle the anticipated demand. This is a precautionary measure to ensure that we have the resources necessary to respond quickly as the rate of hospitalization is anticipated to increase. Later this afternoon, Alberta Health Services is moving to further restrict visitors to hospitals and care centres to protect patients and the most vulnerable. All visitors will need to be completely symptom-free, and only one visitor will be allowed at a time. Children will be restricted from visiting. Children do not necessarily show symptoms of COVID-19 or have very mild symptoms. Exceptions for children will be reviewed and approved by unit managers or nursing staff on a case-by-case basis for exceptional circumstances only. If you have an illness that can be transmitted, with symptoms including fever, cough, loose stools, a rash, or generally feeling unwell, you cannot visit a loved one in the hospital. You will not be allowed in. If you are on self-isolation for COVID-19, or if you are being tested for COVID-19, you cannot visit a loved one in hospital. If you have tested positive for COVID-19, you cannot visit and will not be allowed to visit until you have recovered and received clearance from medical officials. If you are unable to visit, please use other methods to be in touch with your loved one, such as a phone call, video calling, or FaceTime. We recognize that this will likely be difficult for families and loved ones, but we must do all we can to minimize the risk of infection to our residents and staff. As you heard earlier from the Premier, the effects of COVID-19 are widespread and unprecedented. COVID-19 has forced us to make some extremely difficult decisions. We have had to weigh lives against livelihoods. And in order to save lives, I have had to make recommendations that will take away livelihoods for many Albertans over the next several weeks to months. I know that many Albertans are suffering as a result of these measures, and I ask that we all reach out to our neighbours and networks over the next while with compassion and support. We need to support not just those who may be infected with COVID-19 or self-isolating, but also those who have been impacted in other ways, through lost jobs or less income as a result of the measures we have needed to put in place to slow down the spread of this virus. There are no easy solutions to the situation we are in, not just in Alberta, but around the world. We need to face this together and respond to this extraordinary crisis with extraordinary kindness. While the measures we have taken are necessary and required to contain COVID-19, it does not make them any easier. I take these decisions very seriously, and the repercussions will be felt in all aspects of our lives and society. the days and months ahead will be difficult for all of us. We are all needed in this response, and the actions each of us take are important to pulling through together. As an example, I want to share some good news stories with you. In several of the most recent cases that have been reported to me, returning travelers had followed all advice, self-isolated on return, and then called HealthLink for testing. When their positive result came back, they had few or no contacts who were at any risk because of the decisions they had made to stay home and away from others. If you are self-isolating right now, let me say thank you. Your actions are life-saving for others. It is this kind of action that we all need to take, whether or not we have returned from traveling. Stay home when sick, stay home for 14 days after returning from outside the country, and support others to do the same. We will get through this together. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Do you know the ages and conditions of these people who are in the ICU and the other 3 in hospital?
So I know of those in the ICU, 2 are in their 60s and 1 in their 40s. I know the one in their 40s has pre-existing medical conditions. I don't have information on the other hospitalized patients right now.
We can get that for you as well. Dylan and then Julie.
Sorry, can I just have a quick follow-up based on ages? One person reached out to me and said they're surprised to see most cases, I think it was revealed yesterday, between about 35 and 54. I think a lot of people are expecting these patients to be a lot older, and we saw very few in that age range. Do you have a theory of why that is so far? Or?
So the vast majority of our cases are in returning travelers and their close contacts. So what we're seeing are the people who vacationed over the course of sort of late February-ish and then returned. And so, again, most of those people are people in that age range who took their vacations at that time. I imagine as we start seeing older populations returning, perhaps from being abroad or in the US during the winter time, we may then see that age shift. But again, it's really reflecting who has traveled, because most of our cases are in travelers. And I want to emphasize just on that point that while the risk of severe cases is higher in the elderly and those with chronic conditions, even sometimes young and otherwise healthy people can sometimes get severe disease. So this is not a disease that anyone should take lightly.
Dylan and then Julie.
Yeah, the Premier or just before you came out, said that he expects the virus to peak in 4 or 5 weeks and then hopefully ease after that. I was wondering if you have any follow-up or any statement on that timeline.
So what we're doing to try to anticipate is looking at modeling data. And anyone who's ever worked with mathematical models knows that you try to get you the best data that you can and the assumptions that you can, and then you plug them into the model, and it shows you what might happen. And so right now we're operating with data where we look for other jurisdictions like France, Italy, or the UK, looking at other countries around the world that have seen an uptick in their cases. And then we're trying to anticipate if we had a similar rise, what would that look like here? So it's a projection that has all sorts of assumptions built into it. It really does assume that we're able to control the spread of the virus. But at the moment, that's our projection, is that we could see around mid-April the peak for right now. But as I said yesterday, what we don't know is where we go from there, because previously when we've had new respiratory viruses, most of this has been influenza, we've seen a second peak in the fall. And so even though we may see a rise and a fall then in the spring and going into summer, there could be another wave of this coming later.
Excellent.
Hoping to get an update on 811. We heard over the weekend it was about 6,300 calls per day. What are we looking at now? Has that gone up? Has it gone down at all?
I wonder, Dr. Jaffe, you don't have that data? Yeah. We can get the data. I again know HealthLink continues to be extremely busy. I know that people are calling and not able to get through because the lines are all full, and that people are waiting on hold. I recognize it's very frustrating, but again, it's part of this extraordinary response. And so I would say to Albertans who are trying to get through and haven't been able to yet, if they are experiencing mild symptoms, that they can do the right thing. Even without talking to HealthLink, even without a lab test, they can stay home and self-isolate and continue trying to make that call, or using the online assessment tool, because it may be For example, we hear that sometimes people call HealthLink very worried, but they don't actually have any symptoms. So if they have no symptoms, they're feeling completely well, then there's no need for them to be tested. And so if they go through that online tool, sometimes it helps reassure people that they don't actually need to speak with someone on HealthLink. So the online tool is a great first step. And then if it suggests that calling HealthLink is wise, again, I just ask for patience. I know it's difficult, but people can stay home when they're sick, even without HealthLink or testing.
Just a quick follow-up. I know some other provinces are moving to no visitors at all in their hospitals. Why are we still allowing people, even if they're symptom-free, to be visiting hospitals?
So these kinds of decisions are always a risk trade-off. We know that Albertans who are in hospital are obviously suffering because they're there for health reasons. And we know that having family and friends can be something that helps them get through. So we're trying to balance the needs of patients for having that kind of support from family members with wanting to limit the spread of infection. And so that's why those symptom checks, making sure that we're limiting the number of people. And again, unfortunately, I know this can be difficult, but not allowing children to come in are the measures we believe are prudent at this time. And if at some point we feel that we need to move towards further restrictions, we would do so. But again, trying to balance the needs of patients and family members against limiting the spread of virus.
And so just quickly, what would be that tipping point then?
Well, I think if we were seeing further community transmission, that might be a trigger for making further reductions. But again, at this point, we're trying to balance the needs and concerns of all involved.
We're going to go to the phone, guys, and then come back to the room. Operator, could you patch through the first question?
Yes, the first question is from Kieran Levitz of the Toronto Star. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Hinshaw. I've been hearing from some teachers who are finding themselves concerned around school boards asking them to come into the schools still, even though classes are canceled. And some of them are quite large schools, and obviously these mandates kind of change from school board to school board, and I realize it's kind of up to the school boards. But I'm just wondering from a public health standpoint, what you might say to those teachers who are still sort of required to go in and work in the schools.
So the reason that we chose the mechanism for restricting access to schools, we did not close schools legally. We prohibited classes from taking place. And the reason that we did that is that we wanted to enable schools to be able to continue to provide education to students and to do that in a way that didn't have students congregating together. So I'm not sure how different school boards are choosing to make that happen, but if teachers are going into the schools, as long as they're or social distancing, so they're staying at least 2 meters away from others, hand sanitizer, if it's just teachers in the schools and no one else, again, the risk to those individuals would be considered to be low because, again, there would be very small numbers. So it really is up to those school boards to determine how they want to handle again, the ability to provide support to students so that they can continue learning even though classes are closed.
Excellent. And a friendly reminder, if you do have questions that are not health related, we can definitely connect you with someone if you need. Operator, could you patch through another question, please?
Yes, the next question is from Brianna Carson-Smith of Global News. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hinshaw. I wanted to ask about the childcare situation to see if that was being looked at again, because some daycares are saying that they would like to have 6 kids if that's what day homes or even the general public is allowed. Is that being looked at?
We are working with Children's Services from a health perspective, and so working to see what kinds of options, for example, essential service providers. We know in other provinces there have been exemptions made to allow daycares to operate for those families so that we're not impeding essential service delivery. And so we are working with Children's Services, again, from a health perspective. And so I think at this time we don't have a decision, but we are aware of some of these interests, and we are working again with Children's Services Ministry.
Take one more on the phone, and then we'll come back to the room.
Thank you. The next question is from Kevin Nimick of CTV. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hinshaw. Calgary has more than triple the amount of cases that Edmonton does. Can you speculate why that might be?
So there's a couple of things. One is that Calgary has more international travel coming into that city than Edmonton. And given that, again, the vast majority of our cases are travel related, that's a part of the reason. We've also had a few clusters in Calgary. So there was one particular home meeting where there was an individual who had come from outside of the country and was in that setting, and there are many people who were attending that particular meeting who have since become symptomatic. And I want to emphasize that in that particular case, no one did anything wrong. So at the time that that meeting happened, that was before we had put our self-isolation recommendations in place for all people coming into the province from outside the country to self-isolate for 14 days. So in that particular meeting, it certainly has caused a significant number of additional cases. However, again, I want to emphasize that that wasn't because they were disobeying the rules in place at that time. And I think sometimes we forget when we hear about new cases coming up that things have been moving so quickly and changing day to day. And if people followed those recommendations, we adjusted based on new evidence, but there was some risk before we put the recommendations in place. But we have the benefit of hindsight. And again, the people in that meeting, they followed the instructions that we had given at that time. And that's partly why we're increasing our measures right now, is because we want to be very clear about what we believe is necessary to keep Albertans safe.
Dr. Hinshaw, last week you said 26% of cases were from the United States. Do you have a breakdown of the cases to date, where they're from?
Oh, that's a really good question. Can I get back to you on that? I know that of the testing that we're doing, almost half the testing we're doing for returning travelers is those coming from the United States, but I don't have a breakdown on numbers.
We can get that.
But we can get that to you.
And then a second question for Dr. Johnson. We're hearing reports in other provinces of supplies that are being stolen from hospitals. Are we seeing that here in Alberta, and what do you have to say about that?
So thank you for that question. I have not heard any specific indications that our supplies are going missing. I do know that we are going through increased supplies in some of our settings. That would be expected given the circumstances. What I would say to Albertans is, and I'm going to say this clearly, we have your backs. Within Alberta Health Services, we will be caring for Albertans when they need care. We have your backs. We need you to have our backs. So if supplies are going missing, I urge Albertans to think twice. We need those supplies to help care for Albertans who will be in hospital.
Scott?
Either one of you guys can answer this one, I think, but the Premier just came out here and said he feels the province has enough ventilators. I'm not sure if he commented on ICU beds, but he said the one thing he believes the province needs right now is qualified people to work these, ventilators and special equipment like that. Would you agree with him?
Thank you for that question. We are, as I've said the last couple of days, we are in the midst of intensive planning. We have a group that is dedicated exactly to that issue, to ensure that we secure the space that we will need. We know that we will need more space. We do have equipment, and so we are securing the space, planning for that need that we anticipate will increase over the next few weeks, and at the same time ensuring that we will have the personnel that we need in order to care for Albertans who may need that care.
Dr. Hinshaw, do you have anything to add? Or no? Yeah, Janet?
Oh, yeah, my colleagues wanted to know about the definition of background testing. So what does that mean, and how do you decide, I'm assuming it has to do with community spread, but how do you decide what is the appropriate level, or how you test for determining what the general exposure is like?
For sure. So we have regular surveillance set up in place that we use every year for our influenza surveillance and other respiratory viruses. And that includes, there's some family doctors' offices who are part of a specific network called Sentinel Surveillance, which means we identify certain particular doctors who are willing to work with us. Again, this happens every year for influenza and other respiratory viruses. And so those family doctors, the tests that they take are now being run for all respiratory viruses, including COVID-19. In addition, we do look at any patient who's admitted to hospital, so any patient who's ill enough to need hospital care is getting a test for COVID-19 if they have respiratory symptoms. And we also test any outbreaks in the province. So we also regularly, all year long, if there are people in a long-term care or continuing care setting who are ill with fever or cough, we test those people for respiratory viruses like influenza. And so for the last 10 days, we've been adding COVID-19 to all of those tests as well. And so that's our current kind of background testing. But what I'm talking about now is thinking about whether or not we need to shift to do additional testing for community members. But again, I would kind of go back to that point that I mentioned, that we've done one test for every 290 Albertans. So we are doing an extraordinary amount of testing. And while we're looking at potentially making some shifts, we do think that we have had those things in place, again, ever since we started our increased travel testing, and have been able to detect some of these community cases as a result of those protocols.
So some of the positive tests came through the background testing?
That's right, yes.
And so what proportion of the tests right now are background, and what proportion of the tests are suspected cases?
I really wish. So we're working on that data. You know, we get the test data and we're working on breaking it down, but unfortunately we don't have a single code within our administrative database to be able to determine what source it came from. So we are working on that, and I unfortunately don't have an answer at this time.
We're going to go to the phones and then we'll come back to the room. Operator, could you patch through the question, please?
Yes, the next question is from David Staples of the Journal. Please go ahead.
Hi, Doctor. I've been reading about some studies that have been going on in other countries around a drug called chloroquine in terms of some hopeful results in terms of treatment of the disease. Are you aware of these and other studies? I know a lot of Albertans are reading this kind of thing online. And what kind of weight are you putting on this kind of information? And is any of this kind of work on chloroquine or other treatment drugs going on in Alberta that you know of?
So at the moment, again, we have very few cases in hospital. So I can't speak to the specifics of individual cases. I know that there is an experimental treatment called remdesivir that is available through the Special Access Program through Health Canada. It's not currently licensed in Canada, but can be accessed again through special application. So I know in certain cases where clinicians have felt that it is warranted, they have made that application through federal access. And then other therapies that are being considered with respect, or the evidence that's emerging around some of those therapies, Alberta Health Services had indicated to us that they were going to be putting together a working group. So I will say that my expertise is around public health and epidemiology and population medicine, but the specific treatment of critically ill individuals would be the specialties of people who are working in Alberta Health Services. And so we've asked them to look at emerging evidence to determine what are the kinds of therapies where there is evidence emerging that they think we might need to be using, and then make sure that we have access to those drugs if there are therapies where evidence seems to indicate that we may need them. So that work is underway, but again, that's more at a treatment level and not so much at the public health level, because it is more about individual patient management.
Excellent. Operator, could you patch through another question?
Oh, I have a follow-up.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, David.
A lot of people are trying to support their local restaurants by ordering skip the dishes and other services where the food's delivered. I'm just wondering how safe that is and what advice you would give Albertans who want to support their local restaurants and also be fed that way in terms of getting packages from outside. What should we have any worry about that, or what should we do?
So we know that the virus can survive on some surfaces for several hours. It does not seem to survive on paper, those kinds of products, for very long. So getting, a paper box of something delivered is not considered to be a significant risk. I think I would certainly remind all Albertans who are working, whether it's the restaurant industry or delivery services, that they should not be working when symptomatic. But if somebody's ordering food in, this is not a foodborne illness. So again, it would be more about, if you're wanting to be extra safe, you could unwrap all of that food, put it into your own dishes, wash your hands thoroughly, and then enjoy the food. And again, this is not a foodborne illness, so it's more perhaps about, if you want to be extra sure, making sure that the packaging is removed, wash hands, and then enjoy.
Come back to the room for the final couple.
When you were talking about medicine in a rural, not a city context, what sort of concerns do you have if people get sick, or and how do we access testing and maybe more far-flung parts of the province where the population is lower, but and say, for example, in Hunter colonies, that kind of thing?
Right. So with respect to rural testing, every zone has set up testing access in the ways that make sense for their population, for the demand that they're having. And so what many of the zones have done is they have either public health nurses or community paramedics who can go into people's homes and do those tests. So where the demand is low and the population density is low, they haven't set up an assessment center. That wouldn't be a good use of resources, but they have been able to then go into people's homes to do the tests wherever they have a public health clinic, for example. So again, accessing that is through 811. So whether urban or rural, that's the best place to go. And then 811, if a person needs a test, can make sure they're connected with the local area that then goes out and either does the swab in some rural places, or in some places in Central Zone, for example, some assessment centers have been set up in places where the volume has started to rise of test demand. And then I don't know if you were also asking about care provision in rural places?
Yes. Say if someone gets sick or has a loved one who is sick and we're talking miles between farms, how does that change versus the city?
So maybe I'll turn that over to Dr. Jaffe with respect to care in rural areas.
So we are organized, of course, into 5 zones within Alberta Health Services, and within those zones, there are a network of family physicians and specialists where needed, and we work very closely together, and we are available in the large metro areas to provide guidance, to provide support as needed, to answer questions, and we will do what we need to do in order to help Albertans.
Are you concerned that whether they're nurses or physicians or paramedics that might get sick and just the amount of medical professionals available to assist people will be too low in some of these smaller hospitals, smaller areas? And how do you react to that? How do you plan?
So the risk of acquiring COVID-19, of course, is going to be present in the community. At the current time, it's not widely spread in the community. We're trying to prevent that from happening as best we can through all the measures that Dr. Hinshaw has discussed. As healthcare workers, when we're in the community, of course, we have the same risk as anyone else. When we are at work, we have strict protocols in place in order to protect healthcare workers. They should not be acquiring COVID-19 while at work.
Excellent. Last one. I saw Dylan had it first.
Dr. Hinshaw, I believe this is a question for you. A couple days ago, you were asked if you could classify the risk as low, medium, or high. I was wondering if I could ask that same question today.
So we're really moving away from kind of a single dimensional moving the risk up a level. So I think at this point, there is risk of being exposed in the community. We don't necessarily know how widespread it is. Again, we are doing a lot of testing and looking at perhaps shifting that a little bit. I think the risk to people who have chronic conditions or those who are older, particularly those over the age of 80, but even over the age of 65, there's some additional risk. So the risk to them, if they should become infected, is significant. And so I believe that at this time, Albertans should consider the risk to themselves of being exposed. Again, we don't believe that it's widespread, but it is out there. So it's prudent to take precautions. I hesitate to give a level because it's very difficult. It depends in some part on the person who is exposed and also in some part on the characterization of how it's spreading. And again, that's work that we're doing. It's in some ways reassuring, despite the volume of tests we've done, that we only have 6 cases where we believe it was acquired in the community. But those 6 cases are game changers. And so Albertans need to take this very seriously. But I can't really give you one word to describe the risk.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone, for coming. There'll be another update tomorrow at 3:30. If you need any additional information, we are updating the website, alberta.ca/COVID-19, multiple times every day. Thank you.